Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Board of Pharmacy's webinar today. I'm Tom Glinsky, Chief Inspector with the board, and with me today is Inspector Barbara Wood. She's our inspector in the southeast Missouri area and parts of southern St. Louis. So Barb, thanks for coming today to help.
You're welcome, Tom.
Before we get started, we'll go over a few things. We have a lot of people on the call on the webinar today that may not have been on one in the past. So just so you know, all participants are muted. If you have anything, if you have any issues with your computer audio, you can try the telephone option on your GoToWebinar. So if you go to your webinar toolbar on your screen, you can see the option to use a phone call and dial in with those numbers. We are offering continuing education today. To be eligible for that, you must be individually logged on to GoToWebinar. You cannot share your computer or your login with someone else, or have further instructions at the end of the webinar about this. And just a reminder, the board does not submit to the CPE monitor, so you need to save your certificates that we'll email you. If you'd like handouts of the slides today, there's two places you may find those. You can go to the board's website under upcoming events, and you'll see a link to them there, or on your GoToWebinar toolbar, if you go to the handouts tab at the bottom, you can click that, and then you'll see the handouts, a PDF of the handouts there. We do record all our webinars and post them on our website. It could take 15 days, however, before that makes it there. If we have time today, we'll try to answer some questions from participants. If you'd like to send us a question during the webinar, go to your GoToWebinar toolbar, and at the bottom under the questions tab, you can enter your question and hit send. And again, we'll take those at the end of the webinar. So we're going to get started now. I have today's webinar broken down into different topics related to drug distributors and third-party logistic providers. We'll talk just briefly about the regulations, licensure requirements. We'll go into the standards of practice. I'll give you some of the inspection issues we find, some tips about inspections, and then some of the resources the board has for licensees. And then I said we'll try to have some room for questions. So the statutes, all the things we talk about today will originate from the board statutes and regulations. The distributor and third-party logistic provider statutes are in Chapter 338 in sections 330 to 370. And then the regulations are found in the Code of State Regulations, as you see here, 20 CSR 2220-, and then there's a Chapter 5 for drug distributors, and Chapter 8 is third-party logistic providers. You can find all this on the board's website. If you go to our homepage on the left side, you'll see links. One of them says statutes and rules, and it'll take you to that, either an online version. And now, as you see under the new on the right there, it says new. We actually have a PDF of the law book now on our thing that you can actually download if you'd like it on your own computer. Just a reminder, statutes are created, they're otherwise known as laws. They're created through the legislature process. They're introduced as bills, they get passed, and the governor signs them for them to become laws. Regulations are drafted by the board, and they go in through a formal rulemaking process before they become finalized. So licensure requirements for drug distributors and 3PLs. The first thing to say is people ask, well, what's the difference between a 3PL and a drug distributor? So this is the definition out of our regulation and statute. And basically it comes down to ownership of the product and what's being done with the product. So a 3PL does not take ownership of the product, and they have no responsibility directing on where that product is sold or where it's distributed to. And that's the difference between a 3PL and a drug distributor. Now, we have some entities that do both drug distributing, where they own the product themselves and they also are distributing on behalf of others. They actually require two licenses with us, a drug distributor license and a 3PL license. There would be two separate licenses at that facility. So what requires a license? The statute says a license required if you're distributing, providing, or offering a legend drug or drug-related medical device to any person other than the ultimate consumer, which is the patient. So that's what requires. I'm going to break that down and go through what all that means in a couple slides. But it also includes actual constructive and attempted transfer. So that includes people who are not actually handling the product themselves, but they're involved in the processing of taking orders, dictating where stuff goes, purchasing and stuff like that. So that would include brokers and virtual manufacturers. We get lots of questions about licensure of virtual manufacturers. So if you're a broker, you don't handle any product, you're just brokering deals of drugs, or a virtual manufacturer who maybe is contracting other people to do the manufacturing and the distribution for them. They're not actually handling any physical product. If you're located within our state, you would need a license for your office to do those activities. If you're located, a broker or a virtual manufacturer located outside of the state does not need a license with us as long as they're not shipping or handling any product that comes into our state from that location. So there is a difference there, whether you're in state or out of state when it comes to brokers and virtual manufacturers. So I'll break that definition down. So what's a legend drug? So it goes to how the product is labeled. Here are three of the federal legends that might be on a drug. Legend drugs are also known as prescription drugs by some people. They require a prescription when they're dispensed. But for our purposes for distribution, we're looking at how the product is labeled. If it has one of these three legends on it, then it would be a legend drug. It does include medical gases. They are legend drugs, and veterinary drugs are also included in our requirements. It does not include any over-the-counter drug products. We do not regulate that activity. But if an entity is distributing any legend drugs, then they would need a license with the board. There is an exemption for investigational use. The exemption is licensure is not required if you're supplying a drug, either investigational drug or a drug used in one of these three types of studies. This all comes right out of our regulation on the different types of studies that it would qualify for. So there are some entities that if all they do is investigational drug distribution for investigational use, they would not need a license with the board. However, if they're doing any kind of other distributing, they would need a license for that facility. We also, the definition said a license is required for drug-related devices. So give you more explanation on that. So if we go back to the label, how is that device labeled? Is it labeled with one of the federal legends? Here's two of them that you might find on a device. But you also, fall under our jurisdiction, the device must contain a drug. So just because it's a medical device with a legend on it doesn't automatically mean you need a license. If that device also contains a drug as part of the device, then that's what triggers the need for a license with the board. So some examples of some drug-related devices would be convenience kits containing a legend drug. So an example would be like maybe a suture kit that has everything you need for suturing, and in that is a vial of lidocaine injection. So that kit contains a drug. Even though it's labeled as a device, it contains a drug as part of that. The other examples would be pre-filled heparin and saline syringes or flushes. Those are actually labeled as devices, but that they do contain a drug, so they would fall under our jurisdiction. And then sterile water and saline for irrigation and inhalation are another one we commonly see. Some of those are labeled as devices and not as drugs, but they contain drugs. And then the definition also talked about the ultimate consumer. So the ultimate consumer is the patient in that definition. So you do not need a license with us to distribute something to the ultimate consumer. For Legend Drugs, that is a pharmacy. You would be licensed as a pharmacy with us. So examples of who is not an ultimate consumer would be individual practitioners, clinics, hospitals, pharmacies, long-term care facilities, ambulance, fire districts, home medical equipment providers, other distributors, wholesalers, and manufacturers. And this also includes intercompany transfers in an organization. So, and a common question we get is related to medical gas. Do I need a license, a distributor license, if I only sell medical gas to the patient? And the answer is no. The distributor license is needed for if you distribute it to anyone other than them. So examples would be, we have some medical gas providers who might be providing nitrous oxide or oxygen to a dentist, or maybe to a hospital, somewhere like that. They would need a distributor license for that activity. But if you're solely doing oxygen, medical gas for the patient, then that does not require a license with the board. So other licensure requirements, we require a license for each location. That applies to all in-state facilities and also applies to any out-of-state locations that are distributing into Missouri. That means if the product is leaving your facility, your out-of-state facility, and coming into Missouri, your facility would need a license unless it's an exemption. Some other exemption would apply. It also includes intercompany shipments. I just mentioned that. So if you're a large chain of distributors, if you have one located in Missouri and you need to get product from one of your other out-of-state facilities, that out-of-state facility would need a license to ship it here into Missouri. Our law does not exempt intercompany shipments, except for there is one related for devices. It's only for devices coming into a distributor located into Missouri. There's some special requirements to meet that exemption in that statute there. I'm not going to go into any further detail on that. We also license foreign entities that are distributing into Missouri. So if you're if you're in a foreign country and your product is leaving your facility coming into Missouri, it would need a license. There are some special exemptions built into our statutes and regulations for certain drugs, such as blood products. There's some drugs in the Strategic National Stockpile, drugs and other exempt hospitals. There are exemptions for that. And there's some exemptions for shipments from pharmacies located into other states into pharmacies into Missouri. I'm not going to go into all of those here, but there are different exemptions and they're pretty specific. There is a special license type for out-of-state manufacturers. It's called the Drug Distributor Registrant License. It's an abbreviated application process. There's a reduced fee for it. It doesn't require a manager in charge. However, there's specific qualification requirements in order to get that option. You have to be inspected by the FDA and had a recent inspection by them to be able to qualify. And then it's only available for out-of-state manufacturers. It does not apply to any of our manufacturers here within Missouri. And I mentioned manager in charge there. So each drug distributor and 3PL needs to have a manager in charge listed on their license. There's specific education or experience requirements in order to be a manager in charge. The manager in charge provides direct supervision over the facility. The regulation requires them to be actively involved and aware of the actual daily operations, and they must physically be present during normal business hours at the operation, except for absences listed here. Now, they don't have to be there 24/7. They just need to be there on a daily basis. Sometimes they may not be there all day, but they do need to be there on a daily basis. The manager in charge also requires a written job description, is a requirement. We get asked questions about, can I be the manager in charge on multiple licenses and facilities? And the question would go back to, are you at each of those facilities on a daily basis? We have seen some like regional chains of distributors who might want to put one regional manager on all their licenses, but that regional manager is not at each facility on a daily basis. So more than likely, if there's a long distance in between the facility, it won't work. However, we do have some facilities that are on campuses that the buildings are across the yard from them, and those managers may be at each location each day. So it is possible to have the same manager in charge on multiple licenses, but they do, again, you have to be there on a daily basis at each one. I'm going to talk about some of the licensure changes that you might have to go through, and these apply to both in-state and out-of-state distributors and 3PLs. If you undergo a change of ownership, you're required to file an application and fee and get a new license, and a new number will be issued. As an ownership change does require a self-inspection. We don't come out automatically for those in Missouri. We let you do a self-inspection. The process, we'll issue that new license on the date of the ownership change, and then you do the self-inspection. So it's kind of been streamlined, the process, so there's no interruption in having a license when you undergo an ownership change. We get a lot of questions about changes in stock ownership, and a change in just the stock ownership of a corporation or LLC is not a change of ownership, but it does require reporting to the board if there's been more than a 25% change. So as long as the corporation or LLC stays the same and there's just a change in who owns the stock of those, that's not a change of ownership. However, if a new LLC or corporation takes over, that is a change of ownership. So again, sometimes these questions are kind of specific, and it's best to email our office with the actual scenario, and we can help you determine whether you need to go through a change of ownership or not. Other changes would be a change of location. So if you need to move your facility, again, that requires an application and fee be submitted. If you're located in Missouri, it requires us to come out and inspect it prior to moving to that new location and operating. So you should not be moving anything in until we've inspected it. Manager in charge changes. Again, this requires an application and fee. There is no grace period for this change. You must name a new manager in charge immediately. And this applies to both in-state and out-of-state distributors and 3PLs. Business or a permit holder name change. Occasionally a business will change their name, or the corporate entity that owns the business might change their name. Again, that requires an application and fee be submitted. And then there's a termination notice if your business goes out of business, or if you decide you don't need a license with us anymore, but the business is still operational, but you want to give up your license because you don't need it. There is a form to fill out that needs to be submitted to the board for that. All of these applications I just mentioned are found on the board's website. On our homepage on the left side, you'll see a link for application and forms. You go to that, and then you'll find a page, and then at the bottom is kind of what the page looks like. It lists all the various different applications we have by license type. So license renewals, drug distributors and 3PL, the licenses expire on October 31st of the odd years. So this year is a renewal year. So we will be Sending out renewal notices. I don't know if they'll be just by email or if we'll be sending postcards too this year. But you will get a notice either via email or by mail. And that notice usually goes out in approximately August, the beginning of August, to let you know it's time to renew. There is no grace period. If your license is not renewed by August 31st, then you cannot continue to operate either in Missouri or ship product into Missouri. If you do not renew during that, there is no grace period for that. You can still renew your license up to 30 days. After that 30-day period, you would have to file a new application. But during that 30-day period, you could not be operating. So that's coming up. So be on the lookout, mark your calendars that this is renewal year. During the renewal, on the renewal form, you cannot make an ownership change, a location change, or a manager in charge change. If you need to do one of those, you also must submit the separate application for those. And then on the renewal are some questions that must be answered honestly. There's one dealing with manager in charge and owners and officers, criminal activity related to those. And then there's also a question about other state actions against your license or any kind of federal action against your license. So those need to be answered honestly and disclose any of those activities on your renewal. So now I'm going to switch to the standards of practice, what's required for drug distributors and 3PLs. And this all comes out of these two specific regulations. 5.030 is drug distributors and 8.045 is 3PLs. And as I mentioned earlier, these can all be found on the board's website. So just some specific facility requirements. A drug distributor and 3PL cannot be located within a residence. That usually is an initial inspection issue, but you cannot operate one out of a residence. You can also not share address or space with a business that's not related to distribution or licensed by the state. We have had times where we walk in for an inspection and the facility has sublet space out to some totally other entity unrelated to distribution or being licensed by the state. That's not allowed. Your facility must have adequate size and construction. It must be have a thermostatically controlled drug storage area, and if required, adequate refrigeration freezer equipment. You have to have temperature and humidity recording equipment, and you must have a separate labeled area for quarantine, distressed, and outdated products. Security requirements, you got to have adequate locks, windows, and doors. You're required to have exterior lighting on your perimeter. You must have a monitored alarm system. And then you got to have other features just to prevent any unauthorized access to drugs or theft or diversion. So different setups, you know, some people have cages, stuff like that. It all depends on how large your operation is and how many people come and go out of there. We also don't allow drop ceiling access. That's where you have drop ceilings that there's nothing preventing someone, your neighbor next door, from crawling over your wall and going through your drop ceiling. Again, that's an initial inspection issue. We will be looking for that on initial inspection. If you handle controlled substances, then you have special security requirements related to that. And then you're also, distributors and 3PLs are required to have an authorized personnel list. That's people who have access to the drug supply at your facility. And again, that's needs to be updated and kept current. Sanitation requirements, 3PLs and drug distributors are required to have hot and cold water somewhere at the facility and proper sewage disposal. They need to have an absence of insects and rodents, and if necessary, a pest control plan. You cannot have animals at your facility except for ADA service animals. Once I came across a distributor who had a mice problem in their warehouse. Their solution was to bring a couple cats from home that lived at the facility then. So that's an example of animals. Mice shouldn't be in the facility, and cats should not be in the facility. Aisles and walkways need to be free of debris. We shouldn't see trash and dirt all over the place at your facility. And drug product must be stored off the floor on pallets or shelving. Licenses and registrations, the board requires that you post your license from the board. You get a certificate when you're licensed with that. It must be posted in a conspicuous place. You also must keep it current, keep it renewed and current. And also accurate. If you move, change locations, a change of ownership, you got to keep that license accurate with that kind of information. And if applicable, you might have licenses from other entities. So if you handle controlled substances, you ought to have in Missouri, your Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, otherwise known as BNDD. You'd have a registration with those. They do not register out-of-state facility. They only register in-state facilities. And then if you're doing controlled substances, you would have a DEA registration. And then if you're a drug manufacturer, repacker, you would have FDA registration. So you need to make sure all your registrations are kept up to date and current. For product storage, it must be stored in accordance with label temperature requirements. As I mentioned earlier, you have to have temperature and humidity recording devices. It requires you to have a daily reading, or you can be using a continuous monitoring device that alerts you if something goes out of spec. You must have an area that's physically separated from your active inventory to store quarantine, distressed, and outdated product, and that needs to be labeled. That area needs to be labeled. If you handle both veterinary and human products, they need to be stored separately. And if you handle flammable products, they should be separated. There are some exemptions for medical gas distributors. These exemptions only apply if medical gas is the only drug you distribute. So if you handle medical gas, but you also carry, let's say, water for inhalation or some other device that has a drug in it, or if you handle any other type of drug, these exemptions do not apply. So this is only for true medical gas distributors. You have a built-in exemption for exterior lighting, the alarm system, the controls drug storage area, the temperature and humidity recordings, and storing your product off the floor. Now, if you handle nitrous oxide, you do not get the exemption for exterior lighting and the alarm, but you get the other three. So these are built into regulation. You don't have to request these. Years ago, you had to request an exemption for those. So product handling at your facility, you need to be examining incoming and outgoing product for damage and contamination. You make sure it's properly labeled, lot numbers, expiration dates, and the drug label itself. And then if you allow return product back into your facility to be redistributed, you must have a process to make sure it's being examined to make sure it meets the qualifications to be redistributed. Policies and procedures, both drug distributors and 3PLs are required to have them. The drug distributor rule actually spells out the bullets I have on the next two slides. 3PL just says you have to have it covering all aspects. So these bullets aren't spelled out in that regulation, but would apply to a 3PL also. So it's a good list for a 3PL. So you have to have these can be written, these have to be written policies and procedures, recovering product receipt, storage and security, stock rotation, inventory control and distribution. You need a policy on how you handle and check for outdated drug product at your facility, how you handle recalls and your processes for that, how you monitor and report losses or inventory inaccuracies, how you look for and investigate counterfeit products and how you report those, and reporting of any kind of losses or criminal activity involving theft or diversion. And then your facility must have an emergency disaster crisis plan. For entities located in Missouri, regulation requires that you only receive product from people who are licensed with the board. So you cannot receive product from unlicensed entities. If you're located in Missouri, your suppliers of drugs and drug-related medical devices must hold a license with us. That may be a drug distributor license, it might be a 3PL license, it could be a drug distributor registrant license, it could be a pharmacy in some cases, possibly. So it needs to be coming from someone who is licensed. And as I mentioned before, we do license foreign entities. We do have distributors in Missouri who receive product directly from foreign entities. You can always do a licensee search on the board's website, and here's a direct link to it. But if you go to our website, we have a link to it, and you can search that. If you can't find them there, you can always ask your supplier to send you a copy of their board's certificate if you want to see that. And if all else fails, I guess you could check with the board office if you're having trouble finding them during the licensee search. Regulation requires some specific things be reported to the board. Any counterfeit, contraband, or suspect product must be reported to the board. Any type of criminal or suspect activity involving your inventory has to be reported to the board. Any diversion or theft of any product has to be reported to the board. And then if you have any kind of action taken by other agencies against your license, say by other out-of-state boards of pharmacy or the federal government or any other agencies, you need to report that to the board. So if you are disciplined in another state, you need to report that to us. Or if you give up your license in another state in lieu of that, you would need to report that. Or if you're excluded from any kind of healthcare program. So if you're excluded from Medicare or Medicaid, that needs to be reported to the board. Distributors and 3PLs are required to keep specific records. Those records have to be kept for 3 years. They can be in paper or electronic records, but they must be available during the inspection, and the board does have the right to review and photocopy any records that you have. So some of the records you talked about temperature and humidity requirements, so you have to keep those records. If you have a pest control plan, you need to keep those. Your authorized personnel list that I mentioned earlier, and the job descriptions. And it's not just for your manager in charge. If you have any other supervisors at the facility that are overseeing distribution activities, you would need a job description for them. You would have receipt and distribution records, so records for the product coming in and for the product going out. And then any kind of records related to any of the reporting. So if you had to report a theft to us, then you would need to keep documentation of that theft and what was reported. And then there's like controlled substance. If you handle controlled substances, both BNDD and DEA have certain record requirements for you to keep there too. Besides the board's requirements, that's what I was just going over there. There could be other state or federal requirements depending on who you're licensed with. So as I mentioned, if you do controlled substances, Missouri BNDD has their own set of requirements of what you might do. If you have controlled substances, DEA requirements would apply also. If you're a manufacturer, then you have FDA requirements on you too. And then the Federal Drug Supply Chain Security Act, that applies to drug distributors and 3PLs, and you would have to be in compliance with that. That's a whole nother topic. I'm not going to go into that today. There's a variety of resources out there if you need more information about the DSCSA. So now I'm going to talk just about some of the things we find on inspections. So as we routinely inspect Missouri facilities, we can inspect out-of-state facilities. That rarely happens. So This section pretty much kind of geared towards our in-state facilities. So we will come around every 18 months to 2 years on routine inspections. We'll be there more often if there's an issue with the facility. But some of the findings we see is unsanitary conditions, so dust and dirt buildup, pests, cobwebs and trash debris in the facility. We've also had some issues with water in the facility from leaky roofs is another issue that we come across, have had issues with at facilities. You're required to have an alarm. It needs to be functioning. Sometimes we go in and the alarm's not working. So it needs to be a functioning alarm. No separate area for your distressed, outdated quarantine products, or it's not labeled. It probably more likely it's not labeled. Most of you have an area, but it's not labeled. We do find product stored on the floor. It needs to be on pallets or on shelving. You can't leave product just stored on the floor. When it comes to temperature and humidity requirements, you should have a daily reading or continuous reading for the temperature in your facility, the room temperature, and any refrigerator and freezers where drugs is stored. And then for humidity of any room humidity where drugs are stored. And then sometimes they're unable to produce any evidence of an active pest control plan. So you should be saving, a lot of times you have monthly or quarterly visits from your provider, and you want to keep that documentation. Something we see at medical gas facilities is actual cylinders where the drug label is illegible. Because cylinders are reused, those labels do get beat up from all the movement and banging around those cylinders go through. And sometimes we come across cylinders where the drug label is no longer legible, needs to be replaced by whoever filled that cylinder, or sometimes the lot number, usually that's a separate sticker on the cylinder, it gets knocked off and we find product that it doesn't have a lot number on it. Again, when product's coming in from your supplier, you should be checking to make sure it's properly labeled. Other observations we find, missing or outdated authorized personnel list. Again, you need to keep it updated. When you have change in personnel, you need to keep that list updated. And again, it's only a list of people who have access to the drug supply at your facility. When it comes to policies and procedures, sometimes people don't have them at all. Other times they're just incomplete. They don't cover all the topics that are required, or they're very vague and don't really cover the topic. And then on occasion, sometimes people just are unable to locate their policies and procedures for us, especially with electronic policies and procedures. Sometimes with computer systems, people have trouble knowing where to look them up at. As I mentioned, manager in charge and other supervisors need a written job description. You need to be able to pull that up. And again, if it's electronic, you need to be able to find that for us. The manager in charge not being there on a daily basis, we do uncover that on occasion. Again, they need to be there on a daily basis. And if they're not, then you need to reassign it to someone who is. And usually there is someone there that works there regularly. Our rule does not, dictate who it has to be. It just needs to have someone who has supervisory authority over the facility. And then receiving product from unlicensed suppliers. We run into this routinely. You need to make sure that the people you're receiving product from are properly licensed with us. So now I'm going to just switch to some of the things we investigate. Some of these are related to things we find on inspection that leads into a formal investigation. Others don't start at an inspection. We just learn about things in other ways. And some of these do include our out-of-state facilities. So unlicensed activity, not having a license with us, especially out-of-state entities shipping into the state without a license. Distributing on an expired license, that happens both in-state and out-of-state. People fail to renew their license but continue to operate. Other times we've had to conduct investigations over failure to obtain a new license after a change of ownership, or we've had places go with extended periods of having no manager in charge that we've had to investigate, changing locations without submitting application or having that pre-inspection done. Can trigger an investigation. Controlled substance losses, we've investigated those at distributors before. Failure to report convictions on renewals, has happened, and that's both in and out of state entities have had that issue before. Something that's happened just recently, it's happened a couple times now, is product being returned from a pharmacy to a distributor, but when the pharmacy returned it, they inadvertently left a patient label on it. And then when the wholesaler or distributor got it back, they did not do a good examination of the product and then redistributed that product to another pharmacy. So this has happened a few times now where pharmacy reports they received drug from a distributor that had another pharmacy's prescription and patient information on the product. So again, this goes back to if you allow product to be returned to be redistributed, that it goes through a thorough examination process. And then we have had investigations involving suspect counterfeit product reaching into the state of Missouri. So those, again, these are things, investigations can lead to the board taking action on a license. The board reviews all our investigations and then would make a decision on what the appropriate action would be. So some tips for our in-state facilities that undergo inspections. First, you need to allow the inspector access to your facility. Statute gives us the authority to inspect during your normal business hours. There are times we run into some pushback at the front desk, and it's usually because the person at the front desk doesn't know who we are and what our authority is at the facility. And if they would just put us in touch with the correct person, there wouldn't be an issue. But sometimes it can be a struggle getting to that right person at some facilities. I recommend you review your laws and regulations. I did not cover everything here today. That's in the standards of practice. It's a good idea to read those regulations, either the 3PL or the drug distributor one, based on what your facility's licensed as, and be familiar with those. You need to know where the records that we're going to want to see are kept. We spend a lot of time, I'm going to say, wasting time waiting for people. It's a waste of our time. It's also a waste of your staff's time when they don't know where things are found. They have to get on the phone to call people to find things and then search through file cabinets looking for stuff. So, and this kind of goes to my next thing is keep a list of where all these records are kept. And that goes to my next bullet of having a contingency plan, because we won't stop an inspection just because the manager in charge is not present. We will go ahead and conduct the inspection, and you're expected to know where those records are. So if you don't have the manager in charge there, do you have a plan for what to do if we come in for an inspection on where records would be kept and the procedures you follow when you have an inspector on your facility? And I also recommend you conduct a self-inspection to ensure compliance. You can look at the regulations and just make notes of things and just make sure that you have, you're doing all those properly. So just records, these are the ones, some of them I've already mentioned, but during an inspection, we're going to ask to see your licenses and registrations, your temperature and humidity recordings, pest control plan, your policies and procedures, your authorized personnel lists and job descriptions. We're going to want to see receipt records, so invoices coming in and distribution records, a product going out. And if you're handling controlled substances, there's going to be more specific records there that we're going to ask for related to those. There is a inspection exemption. It allows any distributor who's had or 3PL who's had a FDA inspection within the last 2 years and it's deemed satisfactory by the board, can be exempt from a Board of Pharmacy inspection. You have to have proof of this. The proof would be an establishment inspection report. If you're not familiar with that, that is a summary document that the FDA issues after they do an inspection, or Form 482 and 483. 482 is the FDA form they give you notice of inspection when they start an inspection, and a 483 is the form of objectionable issues they found during the inspection. Those would be the types of proof we take and review to see if you will be granted an exemption. Once a year, to the facilities in Missouri, we send out a request in January. You'll get a letter from us asking if you've had an inspection in the last 2 years and to send the proof of that to us so we can exempt you for that year. Every year we do that. Every year I know there's people that don't respond to that, or they responded last year but not this year. And I know they have been inspected. So it is a way to keep us out of your facility by responding to that letter if you meet those requirements to get that exemption. So now I'm just going to talk briefly about some of the board resources we have on our website. The first one is our compliance guide. It was just revised this month. I'm told it will be on the board's website. If it's not already there right now, it'll be there later today. This is a 25-page document. It's written in layman's terms. It's us trying to explain what the rules and statutes and regulations are in layman's term. It's indexed by topic at the beginning, and there's links to, if you know what you're looking for, you can click the link and it'll take you right to that section. It answers a variety of common questions that distributors would have, like how do I do a change of location? What triggers a change of ownership? What do you mean by temperature and humidity recordings? It gives you answers to a lot of those in layman's terms. It also gives you links to different laws and statutes if you need to look things up further, and also links to some of the forms. Like if you say I need to do a manager in charge change, how do I do that? There would be a link to that form in there. If you're familiar with, we have one of these for pharmacies. This is set up the very same way. It's just a much shorter document than the pharmacy one, but it's a very good tool. And as I said, we just revised it, and it should be on the board's website later today. So some other resources would be found under, if you go to our home page, the link on the left says publication and resources there, and then you'll get a choice, and again, choose publication and resources, and then I'll take you to list of different resources, and they're divided by licensee type. So the pharmacies, drug distributors, you'll see different ones in there. The other thing we highly encourage you to do is sign up for our news and alerts. We send those by email or text. Some of you may have got an email from us, and that wasn't from being signed up from on what I'm talking about here. We sent emails about this webinar to people who we had emails in the licensing data file for, so we may have had your email from an application previously. But I encourage everyone to sign up for this. We send out regularly, probably 3-4 times a month, alerts on different topics. It's stuff we need to get out sooner than the quarterly newsletter, and it's a good way to keep up on what's going on. So if you go to the board's home page, down at the bottom, you'll see this little gray box with the red around it, and there's a link there that you can click, and I'll take you to sign up. And that website, that sign up page, it does let you, if you want to, you limit what types of news you get, you can limit it just to drug distributors there. And this is also how we put out our quarterly newsletter, goes out on this platform too. So board contacts, the board's website, the link's here. If you need to contact the board office, we encourage using email is the best way. And the main email is missouribop@pr.mo.gov. If you go to just that general one, your email will get directed to the correct person. And you can call the board office. Again, we recommend email if at all possible. And for those in-state facilities, we do have on our website the list of our inspectors. We have 9 inspectors, and there's a list there of the counties and they cover, and for the St. Louis area, a list of the zip codes they cover. If you're not familiar with your inspector, that's how you can find them. We did have a recent change in St. Louis with Benny Dean retiring, and Lisa Everett was our inspector in the Southwest Missouri. She moved over to take Benny's territory, and we hired a new inspector, Natalie Foster, for the Southwest Missouri area. So distributors in those areas are going to see new inspectors on their next inspection. So if questions, sometimes inspectors might be the best person to contact for certain questions, and feel free to contact your inspector if you have questions. Okay, so we're now going to take questions. So if you have any questions for us, go to your GoToWebinar toolbar and then click the tab that says questions at the bottom and type it in and hit send. We will only take questions related to today's topic. I know we have a lot of pharmacists on, so we're limiting our questions today just to drug distributor related and 3PL questions. Okay, Barb's going to read me some of the questions.
Does the investigational exemption include commercially available drugs used in a study?
It does. So it's not just an exemption for the investigation drug itself. If that study requires a comparison to a commercially available product, that exemption would apply to if that commercially available product is being distributed for use in a drug study. Okay.
Is a product for veterinary use only, labeled for veterinary use only, considered a legend drug?
Okay, we do see this a lot in the veterinary world where veterinary product has a statement on it that the manufacturer says it's for veterinary use only. That is the manufacturer's recommendation. That is not a true legend. I showed you on the slide what the true legend says. It'll say RX only or caution federal law, and then the rest of that. That statement is just a manufacturer's recommendation. It doesn't make that a legend drug. However, some products are both legend and have that statement on them. So on that. Okay.
Can a drug distributor policy and procedure be in electronic form only?
Yes. So yeah, all our records could be electronic, but they have to be retrievable during the inspection. And that's probably the biggest part, is make sure you know where to find those at.
Is lidocaine considered a drug?
Yes, I mentioned lidocaine being in the convenience kit. If it's labeled as a legend drug in that kit, then yes, it would be.
Are drug distributors required to ship prescription drugs to a specific address? For example, an address listed on a veterinarian Missouri registrant's license.
Our rule does not specifically address that, but we would be questioning why you would be sending to someone, that. But I can't answer that. You need to ask that licensing board of the veterinarian, are they able to receive it somewhere else? So. Okay, so our executive director, Kim Grinston, has joined us, and I think she's going to field some of the questions. So, Barb, why don't you give one to Kim?
Okay. With the DSCSA compliance deadline coming up in November, does the board intend on making changes to their current licensure requirements to align with those federal requirements and definitions?
So it's a great question. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, Kimberly Grinson, Executive Director for the board. So there are several DSCSA questions that are in the chat box, and I'll just address them generally. We are aware of the federal rules that have been filed regarding licensing for drug distributors and 3PLs. The board has been reviewing those, or at least reviewed the draft rule. Once the finalized rules are published by the FDA, the board will be looking at its rules to see what, if any, changes need to be made in Missouri. We do anticipate that some changes will be coming to the licensing provisions of the board's rules, but again, we would need to wait until the FDA has finalized their drafts. The other questions we're getting are about the new requirements that are going to be coming up in November 2023 regarding electronic interoperability. The board is aware of those as well. The board is not the primary enforcer of federal law, so anyone who has questions about what the DSCSA requires should consult with their legal counsel or their compliance coordinators. However, if on inspection we do see violations of federal law, it may be something that your inspector may know. So we encourage everyone. There are several DSCSA resources that are available online. The new compliance guide that Tom mentioned earlier that posted also has some additional information on DSCSA and some reference resources. We strongly encourage everyone to please go through the compliance guide and federal law to be ready for November 2023.
We got a couple questions about out-of-state brokers, and so they wanted me to, could I re-say what I said about out-of-state brokers? So if you're, what I call a broker is someone who's involved in the, they're not actually handling the product, they're the ones taking the order, telling someone else where to send it to. So if you're out of state, you do not need a license with us because you're not physically shipping that product in. You're having someone else do it for you. So the broker's office, if it's out of state, is not licensed with us because you're not shipping anything in. Who needs to be licensed with us is the facility that you're using to ship product into Missouri. And that's who needs license with us. Now, for in-state brokers, that does not apply. You're conducting drug distributor activity in Missouri if you're a broker and you have an office here, so that you would need a license for. But for out of states, if that's all you're doing and no product is leaving your facility coming in Missouri, you would not need a license. It would be the entity you're using to do that for you.
Does a pharmacy need a drug distributor license to distribute to long-term care facility emergency kits and or ambulance districts?
So that question is two-part. You do not need one for long-term care e-kits. That comes under pharmacy law, that you can send kits out, those kits out to them. But to an ambulance district, that's a different story. And that comes down to the 5% rule on if more than 5% of your product is being distributed compared to your pharmacy sales, then you would need to have a drug distributor license with it. Let's see.
A letter that came out in January for the FDA inspections, can that be for out-of-state locations?
Okay, so no, we only because we only routinely inspect Missouri facilities. That letter I talked about in January only goes to in our in-state facilities. The exemption still applies, I believe, if you're out of state, but we normally routinely don't inspect out of state, even though we can, but we don't do it. So we do not send and request that letter, and request the data back then. But we got just maybe enough time for one more question.
Are out-of-state manufacturers required to be licensed?
It depends if that manufacturing facility is shipping into Missouri from that facility, then it would need to be licensed. They would either be licensed as a drug distributor, or they might be able to qualify for the drug distributor registrant. If the facility is not shipping into Missouri, but they're having someone else do it for them, like a 3PL, then that manufacturer does not need a license with us. It's only the entity that is the final point before it gets into Missouri needs the license with us. We are almost out of time, so we're gonna have to stop the questions. Just so next webinar is June 8th, Mo Health Net will be coming to give an update on the pharmacy program. And then in August, we will give our usual legislative update. And in fall of 2023, we'll do our annual compliance question and answer session webinar. We do record our webinars. As I said earlier, it may take 15 days before they become on our website. We do have all our webinars on there, and so far this year we had one other one. It was the technician compliance update that you would find there, plus previous years are on the website. Right, so for those wanting continuing education, you must complete the post survey to earn CE. So do not close your browser. After I close and say I'm going to close the webinar, this little window will come up that tells you I've done that. You will then click close on that window. Again, do not close your browser, and the survey will open. There's 5 questions there. You answer them and click submit. Should you not get the questions, and that happens occasionally, especially if you're using a tablet or a smartphone, you can email us at compliance@pr.mo.gov, and we will email you the questions. You must have them back to us within 24 hours if you want credit. As I mentioned earlier, we do not report to the CPE monitor. We will email certificates to you. It could take up to 30 days before you get those. Make sure you save those. So I want to thank Barb for joining us today and helping out. And I want to thank all of you for attending our webinar today. I am now going to close the webinar.